Good playoff Monday morning. That's just a fact, Jack. The Eagles are going to the playoffs. Why or how, we're not 100% sure. We do know for a fact they'll be playing next Monday night against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This is Birds 365 with Mac and Mac, John McMullen, Jody McDonald. J-Mac, this is Birds 365 episode number 292.
292. We got to be up in the 600s, right?
No, this would be. We've got many. We've got many under our belt. We got many more to go. This was about as ugly a Eagles effort. I need to apologize. I have to admit that I am woefully wrong. I thought that last week against the Arizona Cardinals, the Eagles had hit rock bottom. I think yesterday was worse. It really wasn't competitive, at least, and it just comes down to the way you look at football, is losing a close game late more painful or worse than being totally dominated by a team that was in the midst of a lousy season, which is actually worse. I think yesterday was worse than the loss at home to the Cardinals the week before. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday's the worst they played all season. I mean, it was 24-0 at halftime. They gave up at halftime. That's how bad it was. And they should have, by the way. And you didn't have the Jonathan Gannon knows us excuse. I guess you could throw out the Giants as a division rival. But I didn't hear anybody say that. Yeah, they were just a mess, abject mess on both sides of the football. Yeah, I think whenever this season is over, we're gonna look at that move from Sean Desai and Matt Patricia, and that's going to be sort of the headline of this season. Such a panic move in hindsight, such a disaster. You know, for all the people that say it couldn't get worse, yeah, it can get worse. That's what you said. Oh, it can't get worse than Jonathan Gannon. It got a hell of a lot worse. It can't get worse than Sean Desai. It got a hell of a lot worse. It can always get worse if you panic. And that move, and Emmanuel Acho, I put it on my Twitter account, did a quick clip breakdown of just the miscommunication on defense. In week 18, Jody, granted, a lot of moving parts, but now he's got what's changed between Sean Desai and Matt Patricia. Now he's got Hassan Reddick doing things he's not comfortable doing. He's got Josh Sweat doing things he's not comfortable. So you have the miscommunication of the young players, which is kind of baked in. And then you're adding the veteran players because you're changing up things on the fly. Just an abject disaster. And I always have a tough time getting to the offense because the defense is so bad, but the offense was every bit as bad. Jalen Hurts, maybe that's the worst he's ever played. Now, obviously, it was a short span, but his passer rating was 20 in the 20s. You know, to compound it, he dislocated his middle finger on his throwing hand. They have no blitz. They have no answers for the blitz. I mean, you're coming in there. There are two guys that you know are going to blitz, and that's Flores and Martindale. And Wink's one of them, and they play him twice a year. And you don't have any answers for something you know that's coming. No answers. Zero.
And Flores, as you say, does blitz, but he also doesn't blitz. He'll rush 2 and drop 9. Yeah. Wink is one direction, straight ahead. You know he's coming. You know he's bringing numbers. You know he's going to blitz any opportunity he can. He's the easier to do. Trying to figure out an offense, set up a game plan against Flores is not easy because he'll diverse on you. Not Wink. Wink comes straight ahead at you, and they didn't have answers for it.
And they don't have answers, and they haven't had answers. And by the way, that goes back far past Brian Johnson for all the people. They didn't have answers last year for the blitz. They just overcame it. They don't have traditional blitz beaters, what we call in offenses, hot routes, things like that. They don't do it.
They do. It's called the bubble screen, which doesn't work with this current iteration of the Eagles team.
They just, I don't, they've out talented people for a long stretch of time. And now that teams have kind of figured out what they're trying to do, and there's some injuries and guys missing and all that kind of stuff, and that's the only hope for the playoffs is getting guys back. It's gotten ugly. And, Nick Sirianni, I asked him the question. He got, they kept saying belief. I said, well, why do you have belief? You lost five. And he's talking about flushing the game, flushing the month. Well, you only got one flush left because the next flush is the season. You know, Slay's going to be back. AJ's going to play. DeMonte's going to be back. Swift's going to be back. Fletcher's going to be back. So they weren't playing a lot of guys. Don't get me wrong, but shouldn't be that bad. And it was. It was
Right.
It is that bad.
Before the game started, we debated here during the week, basically all week long, about how the Eagles would handle their players and who would play and who wouldn't play. And we thought that maybe because of discretion, they would sit some guys. Discretion to trying to keep players healthy and not get them hurt. And man, when AJ went down, I could just hear my phone's ringing on WI. Why the hell was he on the field? Of course, you're going to get that. They didn't pull players because of discretion. They pulled players because of the disgrace that was the first half against the New York Giants. You said last week you'd be doing scoreboard watching, and that would help you determine, if not dictate, to determine how you would pull guys off the field. Oh, the only scoreboard they needed to watch was at MetLife Stadium, 24-0, trailing the New York Giants. By the time Sirianni started pulling guys, the Cowboys had just gone ahead of the Commanders. They actually hung in the game for the first quarter and a half before the Cowboys blew them out. The scoreboard of out-of-town games meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was what was happening in the game between the Giants and the Eagles, and they were just simply undressed. And that's scary as heck, Johnny Mac. Nick Sirianni can lean on belief all he wants. It's really tough for anybody to have any belief in this team at this time.
No, it is. And, they're trying to talk themselves into it. You get that kind of feeling. Now, I still think, I still think they're a better team than Tampa Bay. I still think that's a good matchup because, but it has more to do with Tampa Bay than it does with Philadelphia. But then if you look long term, I don't see any way they could beat San Francisco. So, hopefully you're able to go down to Tampa, get some confidence, and you never know what happens in this league. But right now, it doesn't look good. It does not look good, to say the least.
And we really want to, and we will, look at the matchup between the Eagles and the Bucs. They played earlier this year when Eagles were looking like a team that had just gotten to the Super Bowl 10 months previous, and they handled Tampa quite easily in their house back in week number 3. The Bucs are what they are, and they got off to a slow start. Then they won a bunch of games in a row. Then they stumbled in the middle of the season. They've been kind of a tough team to get a handle on all year, but they're a slightly better than average team, and slightly better than average teams can make the playoffs when you're in a very weak division like they were this year. But I just can't come up with any reasons why I think the Eagles can get out of the morass that they're in. We've been waiting for it. All right, fine, San Francisco, they shut us up. We can't beat Dallas and Dallas. Losing to Seattle on the road, losing last week at home to Arizona, and lose. You can have a bad game, Johnny Mac. Anybody can have a bad day. The ball doesn't bounce your way. You got a key injury. You come out a little bit flat. That can happen to anybody. 3 games in the last 4 games, losing to inferior teams, talent-wise, just gives you no momentum. That was my cry all week leading into this game. They needed to build their mojo back. They needed to get momentum back. That's why I thought they should play their starters, because it was more about the Eagles than what the Cowboys are doing or what the playoff standings were. They needed to establish for themselves, for their own confidence level, that they could return to somewhere near what they were last year. They fell flat on their face. And I don't know what the magic elixir that they're going to drink this week that's going to turn things around. They'll say all the right things. Words, sticks, and stuff. You can throw whatever catchphrase you want out there. can you buy anything that they attempt to verbally sell you this week as an Eagle reporter?
No, not from the belief standpoint. There's guys, Brandon Graham was talking about the Dow, Josh Sweat's like, basically doesn't know what's going on. It's, from the player standpoint, you could sense some of the doubt. And Nick, put on a brave face and claimed he believes in everyone, blah, blah, blah. There's no belief in that right now. And that's the word he used, ironically. Other than what I said, that's the only thing that you can hang your hat on. You meant, what are the problems with, they lost Sidney Brown. It looks like it's going to be a torn ACL. And that was a MetLife injury. He looked like he caught his ankle covering a punt. Cam Jurgens hurt his eye. Obviously, Jalen Hurts, I mentioned, got poked in his eye. Cam, dislocated finger for Jalen Hurts. Reed Blankenship hurt his groin. There were a couple of injuries on top of the disaster. Landon Dickerson, for instance, had to play center because Cam was out because of the eye when they took Kelsey out. And then at one point, Landon went in the injury tent, banged something up, and Kelsey was getting ready to go back in because he would have had to because they didn't have anybody else to play center. And ultimately, Landon was able to get out of the tent and get back on the field. So it didn't happen. So to add insult to injury, they got a bunch of guys banged up. Now, the guys, AJ, I think is fine. He was greeting everybody as they came back to the locker room. It looks like he's going to be fine. Obviously, the guys they were cautionary with, DeMonte, Slay, because he probably could have came back in a different situation this week. I expect them back next week. And when your biggest playmaker is Quez Watkins, that's a big difference between Devontae Smith and AJ Brown and everything being back to normal. And that's what Tampa Bay is going to get. So if you want to hang your hat on something, I would hang my hat on that.
On the fact that they did have some guys hurt going into the game, some guys hurt during the game, other than Sidney Brown being done for the year. And it wasn't official, right? They didn't officially announce to it, but everybody.
No, but I saw him. Yeah, I mean, he had a huge brace. He's definitely not coming back this week.
Right.
I mean, your best case scenarios, it's not as bad as Beard, but they usually don't screw up those early ACL indications. Pretty easy test to see what's going on there.
They right now are in a really bad place, a really bad spot. And Nick Sirianni will say all the right things, and Brandon Graham will say all the right things during the week because he is Mr. Positivity, and he will try and come up with. I'm struggling here, guys. I don't know what. John just did a good job to try and sell me, you, and everybody else. Hey, look at all the injuries, and most of these guys will be able to play. Yeah, so I'm just.
That's fair. That's fair.
I am not in a place where I think the Philadelphia Eagles can turn on the spigot or flip the light switch. Use whatever phrase you need to describe just immediately changing something. Change happens over time. And unfortunately, change has been bad for the Philadelphia Eagles this year. But one that you mentioned earlier, and I get your take on this, Jeff Kerr is going to join us coming up just a couple of minutes. Will it come out? I know it's not going to come out at this time, and we have to see what happens with the Eagles coaching staff when the season is over and done with, and it could change from top to bottom. And when I say top, I include the head coach, Nick Sirianni. Will we ever get the true background story as to why Matt Patricia is calling plays for this Philadelphia Eagle team?
I think we will, and I think we will, to be honest, when I think both of them will be gone, but certainly when Sean's going to be gone, and I think ultimately we'll get the real story. And I don't think it's going to be a good one because I think it was panic driven, and when And people can look at it now and see how the Eagles are leaking oil, but I mean, they started thinking about making a change when they were 8-1. That makes no sense. None. Zero. And for all the people who said it couldn't get worse, you're living it. It's gotten exponentially worse. Now you got where you had communication issues with young players. Now you're having communication issue with veteran players because they're changing things on the fly by the seat of their pants. It's gotten much worse. Young coaches need time to grow in their positions, and that's what Sean was, and they didn't give him that opportunity. Now, maybe they had no belief in him to begin with. In fact, that's the clear indication to me. They had no belief in him from the moment he stepped in the building. That's my feeling.
How do you hire a guy like that? How do you give him the job if you got no belief?
Well, they'll tell you because they were screwed over by the tampering and it was so late and nobody else was available, which is absolute bullshit because you can call every coaching staff around the NFL, every position coach, you can if you offer them a coordinator spot, even if they're under contract, they can leave. You cannot block those. You used to be able to block them, but you can't do it anymore. So that's bullshit. And that was their decision, and they regretted it, and they reversed course, and it's gotten even worse.
All right. What I meant by when we get the real story, was it all Sirianni's call? Was he the guy who at 8-1 said, yeah, we, meaning him, because he was the driving force in the selection of the defensive coordinator, made a mistake. This guy's just not up to the job. Was that him? And did he have to sell it to Howie Roseman and Jeff Lurie, or Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman whispering in his ear going, yeah, we kind of gave you the call on the defensive coordinator. This Desai guy is terrible. He's just not getting the job done. That's the question I wanted, just for my own edification, to find out how the decision-making process went down.
I've said pretty consistently, and I know I'll just say real quick. So I've said I do believe Nick, and it was his decision for two reasons. One, how he found him originally. And while, yes, Nick approved the hiring and hired him, how we found him. Number two, he's still in the organization. I think if it came from up top, he would have been fired. He would have been gone. And Nick wanted to keep him around because, I don't know, out of some disjointed loyalty or whatever. So for those two reasons, I do believe Nick, and it was his decision. Now, he's got to run it by people. It's not like he can just walk into the office and say, I'm making this change. He's got to run it by Howie and Jeffrey, and they certainly approved of it. But those are the two reasons why I believe Nick was at the center of it.
Because I think that will factor into, and Jeff Kerr's going to join us in just a second here, I promise. 5 weeks ago, what was the percentage chance that Nick Sirianni could be fired after this season? Zero. That's where I was at. After last week's collapse against the Cardinals, I said, John, I got to admit to you, I'm like up to between 5 and 10%. Didn't think I was going to get here, but I am. Still think Sirianni's going to be the head coach next year, but after yesterday's loss, I'm north of 25%, heading to 50%. And if they lose to Tampa next week, if they go down there and play the same lousy game that they played the last 2 weeks against the Cardinals, and there is no change, I could get north of 50%, which means he could absolutely be fired. So.
By the way, Black Monday has started. It started last night. Arthur Smith out in Atlanta. Ron Rivera officially out in Washington. Scott Fitterer, the Panthers GM, has been fired. The Giants, think about this.
Panthers GM got fired?
Yeah. The Giants fired Bobby Johnson, their offensive line coach, understandably so, and Thomas McGahee, their special teams coordinator, after their greatest performance in years. Poor guys, but obviously it's long.
That's what Black Monday is all about. All right, McDonald and McMullen, Mac Birds 365. Our buddy, Mr. Monday Morning, Jeff Kerr from CBS Sports, was in the press box with John yesterday watching the annihilation of the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll see what he has to say next here on Birds 365.
Go to